Oh, hello everyone. Hello. Welcome to the coolest and the hottest room in the building. Thanks very much. There are some fans branded Hilton over there. If anybody wants, it's just these. And I also took a little poll, and they did sell digital fans in PlayStation Home. So if you think about it, if only those were NFTs, we'd all be able to use them now. Oh no, it doesn't work. Okay, sorry, this is ahead of its time. Why is PlayStation Home one of the most talked about games of 2022? And we have a wonderful panel here who will introduce in a moment. It's basically a big reunion for these guys, so they all worked together for many years on PlayStation Home. And, you know, it was an unusual experiment in the beginning, but it turned into something fascinating that is now incredibly relevant. So in true Sony style, they did something cool way too early and then closed it 2 years before everybody actually wanted one. And I can say that I used to work at Sony, so I can say that. Whereas people who currently work at Sony can't say that, but might think it. I'm going to quickly read out some of the description because I know everybody forgets to read them and just looks at the title. So the metaverse, or Web3, is being heralded as the next big thing in the digital world, with 70% of brands saying they need a significant presence in it, and 50% of those admitting that they have no idea how to achieve that. So that's great. Hopefully they'll spend some money on us developers. The world of cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and blockchain requires virtual spaces to be built so they can sell land in this brave new world. This opens up a great opportunity for games developers. Our services have never been in such high demand. Wow. I will say we've sort of agreed not to talk about NFTs too much. There's quite a lot of chatter about that, and we really want to focus on virtual worlds and world building. But happy to have, I mean, I'm doing some of this stuff, but happy to talk about that outside this. But who knows the most about these digital spaces? What works, what doesn't, and what makes them sticky, i.e. why do people come back? The answer, of course, is these wonderful pioneers here. So these guys all worked on PlayStation Home and have lots of great stuff to tell us about them. And so it was one of the first and most influential of these online virtual worlds where you could meet friends and so on. A virtual community space with social games, avatars, dancing, land, and digital clothing for sale, and all the technical gubbins behind it. Sony arrived early at the party and learned a lot. So we're going to learn some of that now. So I did get some home factoids, wonderfully named by Pete Edward. Conversion rate 6%, which was how many people downloaded and then went back a month later. Retention rate month to month 25%, which is pretty impressive. Average space duration 20 minutes. Average game duration 45 minutes. Number one in the PlayStation forums. Launched in December 2008, and the last day was the 1st of April 2015. It was profitable for the last 4 years, and I think there was probably a fair amount of live R&D before that. So, you know, if you knew the learnings now, you could probably get it to be profitable much quicker. Dev team peaked at 46, and the global team, including all the biz dev staff and so on, was 90. And 60 developers and publishers actually sort of got involved and made stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to go along this line, starting with Angela. Please, Angela, can you introduce yourself? Tell us your sort of role engagement with PlayStation Home, what you're doing now, and what was your biggest surprise about PlayStation Home?
Okay. Oh, the microphone works. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela. I was initially hired at PlayStation Home. I wasn't the head of publishing at the time, but I kind of just made myself head of publishing just by accident. I was there for about, I think it was about 5 or 6 years, and then I moved over to what was called Ski as producer. And now I work for Lockwood Publishing, which is the creator of Avakin Life. My biggest surprise, I think, I've had time to think about this. I've been chatting to the guys about this earlier, is back, you know, obviously we launched in 2008. In those days, sort of a non-tangible asset, something that you can't physically hold, was quite a unique thing, quite new, and a kind of a bizarre kind of concept, really, to buy something that you don't physically own or like physically can hold in your hand. So that really, to me, was really fascinating to watch how many people would just quite happily part with their cash and own something in inverted commas own. That was really fascinating to me, kind of in a sort of psychological way. Okay, so I'm going to move over now to Pete.
Thank Thank you. I'm Peter Edward. I'm the one person on this panel I think I know who still works for Sony. I was the head of the home platform group when we started PlayStation Home, and then inherited the whole global business for the last few years. So I was kind of responsible for the P&L by the end of the project. Most surprising thing for me, I think the first time, because we were game developers initially, and when we originally started developing Home, it was a game. It was an online kind of hub where people would go and find quests to do together. Then it sort of migrated into PlayStation Home, and we created an SDK, which we very self-effacingly called the HDK, the Home Development Kit. I think the most surprising thing for me was the first time we released the HDK and the first time we saw a mini game that developers had made with the HDK, and it blew everybody away because nobody on the team had any idea that you could do what people had done with the SDK that we just put out. So that was a real kind of light bulb moment, and it sort of set the tone for the rest of the platform, really.
Hey, I'm Johnny Venables. I headed up the art and some of the design for PlayStation Home. So I was on it from day one. I was largely responsible for bringing about all the PlayStation Home sort of lobbies. I was on it for about 5 years, and I'm now at Sega, Sports Interactive on Football Manager. My biggest surprise was just how the brands were just so engaged with it.
Two options. Hi, I'm Ali Durrant, and I started as on the Home Platform Group with Pete as a producer, and I was lucky enough to be the producer for Z, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which was an absolutely fantastic ARG and brilliant project to work on. Then I moved over to Ski and was the senior producer for the European territories. Now I work with with Dave at Dream Reality Interactive, and I'm head of production there. The biggest surprise for me with Home, a couple of them. One was I met my husband there, but he was actually working.
Did you say, what are you doing here?
He was actually working at PlayStation. I didn't meet him in Home, but we will come on to that later. But actually, the biggest surprise for me was how much people love to dance, because we kept coming up with more and more dance moves, and people would have like conga lines of dancing, and people would come in and spend absolutely ages just dancing and talking with each other, and it just became such a phenomenon, and it was just brilliant to see. Passing over to Patrick.
Hi, yeah. So my name is Patrick Alunig. I'm the founder of End Dreams. So we got into PlayStation Home very early on. Created this crazy alternate reality game called Z, which ran for, I think it's about 3 months every day, new puzzles and new doors that would open and live events in the real world and billboards on advertising hoardings around Europe and limos in America picking up players and all sorts of crazy stuff tied in with PlayStation Home. That went really well. And then we became, I think, one of the largest publishers in PlayStation Home, selling all sorts of virtual items and games and machines and jukeboxes and spaces and all sorts of fun stuff, turning over more than £1 million a year. It was very profitable for us. It was a lovely space, learned a lot about what people liked buying and didn't like buying and what worked. And obviously we're very sad when PlayStation Home ended. At that point, transitioned to VR, and we've been doing VR ever since. We're about 170 people now making virtual reality games. Most surprising thing is the passion of the community. The PlayStation Home community, absolutely, there was such strength there. When the PlayStation hack happened and the network went down, as soon as it came back up, it was PlayStation Home that was there first. They were in more than anybody else. They were buying stuff straight away. They were hanging out straight away. There was so much love and passion and connectivity between the community, and I've never seen anything like it, and it was incredible.
Thanks. So my first question is, what do you think contributed to the success and the community of PlayStation Home? Who's going to come in first? Johnny, come on.
I think, well, there's a captive audience, right? We had PlayStation users, very passionate users. And I think so you're already sort of preaching to the converted, largely there. So, and I think the fact it was free and eventually on the cross-media bar, so it was there for everybody to try with no cost whatsoever. It did get a fair bit of backlash in the press, I remember, at the time. But yeah, I think that.
Pete?
Yeah, I think, that definitely helped. Being there as a kind of default application for everybody who bought a PS3 definitely helped. And I think also just the people who came in there, you had a PlayStation audience, it was a console audience. There was a level of kind of familiarity and common ground that all of those people already had. So, you could go into load up PlayStation Home, go into a space, meet somebody and say, what games do you like? And know that the person that you were talking to wasn't going to come back and go, I don't know what you're talking about. So you at least had that initial kind of hurdle that of familiarity that you didn't have to get through. Yeah, I mean, it was the people there. That was the thing that instantly kind of got traction. And as Ali said, the speed with which people decided that all they really wanted to do was just hang out and mess around was just incredible. And it just snowballed from there. And it was just enough for people to just hang out and just talk nonsense. And I think that's probably one of the things that there hadn't really been the opportunity for people to do before that. There was nowhere, you either had to go onto a web forum where, people were very serious about the specific game that they were all there to talk about, or you didn't do anything. There was no sort of middle ground where you could just hang out and talk nonsense for a while.
No Discord.
Right. And I think that really helped.
Yeah, I think it was a brilliant place to make friends on PlayStation. And actually, it was hard to do that beforehand. And you could go in there, you could start chatting to people, you could have some fun, and people made some real friends on there. And I think there was a real demand for that this suddenly hit. Actually, a lot of the people that we saw, not all of them, but a much higher percentage than normal, were people that struggled with real life, maybe, or they didn't go out a lot, or maybe they didn't have a lot of friends, or they were disabled. There's a lot of people who found it a brilliant release from the real life and made incredibly strong friendship groups. And I think it's just having it there, and it was such an easy way to go in and meet new people. And PlayStation never really had that before, I don't think.
It's quite interesting actually because we worked with the Japan offices and in the guys in San Francisco. And, these days you just, if you wanted to chat to your colleagues overseas, you go on Slack, whatever, or Zoom. But we didn't need to do that because we had home. So we were just literally hang out in, when we were just in publishing days, just doing the Running Man. And it was great. And I actually invited one of my colleagues in San Francisco to my wedding. I'd never met him in real life. I actually knew him so well through just like hanging out in home, and it's fantastic. So I obviously had first-hand knowledge of that, and I can really sort of see why that there are long-lasting friendships in the real world thanks to home, and it's fantastic. I mean, looking at the amazing technology of, for example, the bowling alley. I don't know if you're familiar with that. People are still struggling to make that kind of thing now. That was so ahead of its time, and the fact that you could have you had mini games within mini games. You could go up to a gaming machine or play pool within a game in the bowling alley space. That's mental. Just thinking about it, that's 15 years ago. So it's just incredible. So you can see why people were drawn to it, because it was very good. Well, I know I'm biased, but yeah. It was still today, looking back, to me, it looks really slick looking at all the stuff, on YouTube and stuff, the people videoing it. So yeah, that's my little.
What were the biggest challenges?
Okay, I'm just going to quickly jump on this as well, because obviously working in publishing and in a sort of product that we sort of so Wild West at the time, that was quite challenging. There were so many, nights where we'd make sure that Pete can buy us some Dominoes because we were still working at 3 o'clock in the morning to try and get the publish out for the next day. There were definitely times that were very challenging technically, because we were learning. We were going, especially you lay the tracks down in order to go forward. But it was very much seat of your pants a lot of the time, but we just had an incredible team. Ali and I worked so well together. We were both bridesmaids at each other's weddings. We became so close, and we just had this incredible team that would just work 36 hours. I don't think I should say that. Was that illegal? I don't know. But straight. But pizza was there, so it was fine.
We wanted to.
Yeah, because we wanted to, because we were so passionate, and we could see this. The product was working. I know a lot of other people didn't, but we could definitely see it.
Can I say another one? So something that was really difficult that we had to set up from scratch was the microtransaction side of things. So this wasn't something that existed already on PlayStation. So it was, we knew that we needed it. We knew how it needed to work. But we were then working with a group or a few groups that hadn't done anything like this before, didn't understand necessarily how it was going to function. So there was a bit of butting heads, but we got there eventually. And I do feel very sorry for them because we were publishing every single week with hundreds of items. And I can't stress enough how hard that was. We had so much work go into that because we wanted to just have lots and lots of stuff for everybody to buy and to try and to play with. And it was... there was a lot of moving parts, and not the smallest of which was changing PlayStation to a microtransactional way of working.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the main challenges that we had was right at the very beginning, when and this is not revealing anything new. This is quite well documented. We didn't know what it was when we'd been hawking it around. When we'd been hawking it around prior to. Release, we had demos and we were showing people things that you could do with it, and they were all very sparkly, kind of technically impressive demos, but we couldn't really say what we wanted people to do in there, and that came through. And it sounds bizarre to say it now, but onboarding wasn't a word back then. It was a word that literally didn't exist, and it certainly wasn't something that we'd thought about, and it certainly wasn't something that we could do. And I think we suffered massively from people coming into PlayStation Home. It was free. It was on the cross-media bar. Anyone who had a PlayStation could download it. Loads of people downloaded it. The vast majority of people walked around for a bit and thought, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here, left and never came back. And that was an issue for us. And that was something it took us a long time to deal with and a long time to recover from. And to be honest, if we'd have figured that out earlier, those retention rates and those conversion rates that Dave was talking about earlier would have been a lot higher. And I think if I was going to give one piece of advice to somebody who's looking to set up a community now, it would be know what it is that you want people to do in your community. Don't try and just build something amazing that people will come to and it will be everything to everybody. Figure out what your audience is and figure out what your audience wants to do, and then build on that, because that's the right way to do it, not the other way around. And we know.
I was just thinking.
I think, just following up on that, I think from an external point of view, Sony, and I think they lost Phil fairly early on, who was like the father of the whole thing. And I think it felt a little bit directionless sometimes. And some people were going, oh, this is just a space to upsell PS3 games. So you come on, you see a little space and it will show you how great the PS3 game is, and then you'll go buy that. That's what it's all about. It's a game advertising space. And it's like, no, that's not what people wanted, and that's not what it became. And people tried to make it a gaming space where you play single player games. It's like, that's not what people wanted to do in there. They can play amazing single player games on the PS3 that are way better than anything you can make in home, just because the budgets are so much bigger. What they wanted to do was hang out and play games together and be with their friends and buy cool stuff and hang out. And that became more and more obvious as we saw how people used it. But I think from the beginning, Sony didn't really understand what it wanted to be, what the aim was, and that was a shame.
Talking of Phil, thinking about living up to some of the promises. So game launching was a thing.
Yeah.
So there was a demo where we could meet in home and then game launch into any PlayStation game. And that is a really cool idea. But then when you try and actually implement that and meet and then launch MotorStorm and then call the disc up and do all the plumbing, that was super tricky.
We did actually get it to work.
It did work. Yeah.
But it required the developers to actually sort of build that into their game as well, and that was the tricky part.
Okay, what did you learn then from PlayStation Home that you still use now? And Angela, you're sort of continuing your publishing role. What were the sort of great bits of learning that you still use, do you think?
Well, I mean, I can speak mainly from the sort of process side of things because I'm less of a biz dev person. But I think for me personally, it's about being dynamic and just keeping up with the times and being able to adapt as quickly as you can, because you have to just keep up with what the demands are from the community. And that's always been the case, and it still is now. both technically speaking and obviously content-wise as well. Yeah, that's really all I have from me. Anyone else want to say anything for this one?
Oh, go on.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, we're working on a few different projects that are quite similar to PlayStation Home in some ways. But the thing that is very, very, it's at the heart of it and the core is that everyone wants to find their tribe. And I think with PlayStation, we did have that obvious audience that everyone who had a PlayStation, they had something in common already. But with the other metaverses that are sort of cropping up, they are giving a place to those that want to find others like themselves. They want to learn more about whatever it might be. They want to be given experiences and opportunities that they wouldn't have in the real world. So it's something, PlayStation Home had the ability to, our avatar system, I'm just going to talk about it for a second. I don't know if it's relevant for this one. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing for its time. It was that we did so much work on that, and it meant that people could really, really express themselves through this avatar system. And obviously with the items that then you could then buy and express yourself that way. It was very, very wanted then. It's still very wanted now. I don't know if any of you went to the fashion talk that just happened. It's something that we don't want it to go away, right? It's a wonderful opportunity to express yourselves online.
One thing I learned, I'm an art and design guy, right? And so designing Home Square and thinking about how you build online lobbies to encourage people to socialize and chat and to encourage emergent behaviors. Home Square was the second version, and we spent a lot of time trying to make semi-private areas. Like when you're in a restaurant and no one likes sitting with their back to a big empty room. So we designed the space to allow for that. And it's one of the things we see a lot with other metaverse propositions. People are designing huge swathes of virtual space, and they can be very lonely and empty. And you can just rattle around in them. So a lot of emergent design around environments to encourage social behavior. That's probably my biggest takeout.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about emergent design. And one of the main things, two main things really that I would take away from it that I still would value today, one of which is don't think that you know better than your community. You might design a space or an experience to be used in one way, but if your community starts using it in a different way, that's what it's for. It's not for the thing you designed it for, it's for what they use it for. And if you try and fight against that, then you're going to fail. So listen to the community and build on what they're doing so that you can improve the experience for them to make it more appealing for them. And the second thing that I would still very much value is value your content creators. Because if your service is successful, you will not be able to keep up with the demand on your own. You have to have developers. As Dave said at the beginning, we had 60 developers and publishers publishing on the Home platform, and we needed them all. And you need that content coming through the platform. That, amongst other things, is one of the main things that brings people back to see what's going on, see what's new. And if you can't provide your developers with a good platform to build on, then they're going to go somewhere that's easier. And then you don't have the content, and then your platform dies.
That was the smartest thing that Sony did, I think, right from the beginning, is saying, we're not going to make all the content ourselves. Pete's team could have said, we're going to make X many avatar costumes a week, X many new spaces, X many bits and pieces. And, it wouldn't have had anywhere near the level and breadth and variety of unusual things that came up by having 60 developers with a SDK that was created for them, and lots of hard work from the team we challenged them all the time, saying, can you do this? Can we do that? We want pets in there. Can you do a pet system? Oh my God. And actually went really well and made loads of money. There were lots of challenges that come from having a big development community, but so many original great things were made from companies like Lockwood and ourselves and all sorts of people that I don't think that any one team would have thought about. And that variety and that constant, new stuff coming in every week kept people there for 5 years and kept people playing and coming back all the time. And I think that was the really smart way of doing it.
You might have sort of partly answered this, but I just want to rinse it to make sure that there's not any others. But what didn't work so well? What do you look back on and think, oh, why did we go for so long doing that thing or doing this? Or,
I think the big thing for me was the loading and the jumping from space to space. If you were going to do Home again now, That's the Achilles heel. The fact that every time a space changed, you had to download this huge thing, and that the internet bandwidth back in 2000 and whatever it was, the 12 was not nearly as good as it is now as well. So that was the pain. To get from one space to another, you had to, there's a long loading time, and quite often you'd have to download this great big thing and then load it all in and then run it. And that unfortunately just meant that the jumping quickly between space to space to see people was quite frustrating. I think if there was one infrastructure thing that you'd change about PlayStation Home, it was that, because it got so many other things right. And I don't think it could have done much more at the time, but now it would be streaming in the cloud and doing all sorts of clever stuff.
And also the syncing of the content with the sort of launching of the experience. I think we were kind of out of sync, especially at the beginning. Lots of big empty spaces, again, back to that point. So yeah, I think we got better at that as we went along, but that was certainly something I'd highlight.
Any others?
I was going to say, I don't have a lot of bad memories of home. I absolutely loved it. I worked in it for about 5.5 years, and it was just brilliant. And I was a warrior for home. I really, really believed in it. And I think maybe the only thing I can think of is that potentially, like we talked about this the other day, that because we didn't really start from a community point of view, we didn't quite get it right for a little while. We had Z quite early. We were actually going to launch with Z. And I don't remember, I asked if we could delay a little bit because I didn't want people to think that that's what home was, because I knew it would end in 3 months, and we didn't have enough content to fill match that much content again. So I wish we'd done more of those. That was really, really fun. But yeah, so if you're thinking of doing a metaverse, definitely do something that involves lots of different media, because they're really fun. So just from a fun perspective and getting people involved in lots of different ways. Yeah.
I was going to say, interestingly, with Z, this was this kind of crazy ARG. One of the things that worked really well was we had puzzles that involved different languages, communities talking to each other. So I think we were one of the first things ever on the PlayStation forums where the German and the French and the Spanish and the Italian and the English fan sites were all talking to each other, because there were puzzles in different languages, and there was a billboard in Germany and a billboard in France and billboards in England, in actual places that people had to solve a puzzle, work out where it was, go take a picture, and then put all the letters together to make a code that they then enter into a keypad to get into this new space. So the communities had to work together. And I think the forum guys were really impressed at the fact that there were French people coming onto the English site in their pidgin English, asking whether we'd found this one and vice versa. And it was lovely to see that communities thing. For me, just goes through everything that worked well in home. It was, when it was at its best, it was just people all working together across different languages, different countries, figuring stuff out, which is great.
I think just so my next question, you kind of have already been doing this, but so 2022 is the year of the metaverse. But what have you learned from home that you think would be most valuable today? And I appreciate you've already given some great
dancing.
Okay. Yeah. But are there any other things that haven't been mentioned yet that you'd like to bring up?
I think one of the main things is, and I sort of alluded to it before, is just focus on the community. Don't try and build a metaverse. I think that's my advice to anyone looking to build a metaverse, is don't build a metaverse. Build a community, build an application, build something that people will be excited by and people will get interested in and people will stick to, and then just let it grow. You're not going to build the metaverse. No one in this room is going to build the metaverse. But what you can do is build something that has a lot of people that are passionate about it, that can then become part of whatever the metaverse begins to be in however long it takes. And I think that's the focus, is look at who your community are, look at what they want to do, look at what you want to be able to engage with them in, and then look to sort of grow that and let the metaverse kind of take care of itself over time.
Yeah, just an additional point. I think thinking back to PlayStation Home days, we built it for the community. And I think these days, when we think about Web3 and metaverse propositions, it's much more about building with the community. And just wanted to add that.
I think thinking about scalability from the early days is important. I have a feeling that I had a conversation with Pete near the end, and he's like, "Oh my god, we never thought we'd have 615,000 unique items that players could own. This is nuts." And I think at the beginning they thought, "Oh, there might be 60." Do you know what I mean? You begin with these slightly smaller numbers, and you don't realize that over the course of 5 or 6 years, with lots of people publishing stuff, it's going to get really big. There's going to be a lot of stuff. So I have a feeling some of the infrastructure stuff was creaking because of the way it was designed, and probably designing it, with very big, ambitious numbers in mind might have been better. I don't know.
That's a really good point, actually, and something that, in conjunction with what I was saying earlier, I think interoperability, standards, that sort of thing is really important. You're going to be building something that hopefully will combine with lots of other platforms and lots of other communities to build something larger than the sum of its parts. But the way to make that work is to not build proprietary platforms, not use proprietary in-house technology, but to kind of embrace the idea of what the metaverse, I guess, is, and look to collaborate with other platforms, look to join up with those other platforms, look to use common standards and things like that, so that collectively the communities can grow. I think we were lucky because we were on the PlayStation. It was a proprietary platform. We had the PlayStation Network, and we kind of built on that because we had a captive audience of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people by the end. And so we were very lucky in that respect. Most people aren't that lucky. So you need to look to kind of collaborate and build and hopefully make it more than the sum of its parts as it grows.
For me, the metaverse is all about you with your friends jumping between different worlds together. And I'd like you to be able to go into Meta Horizon with your friends and then jump into Roblox. And then you've got the same usernames, your same friends. You may look different because Roblox looks different. You won't have the same photoreal avatar. That's fine. Then you jump into Minecraft and you all look like Minecraft characters, but it's still you, your usernames and your friends together. And for me, that's what the metaverse is going to be. And I think anybody who wants to ring fence their space and say, no, we're not going anywhere else, is missing the point of the metaverse.
I think I'd like to lead into that. So where do you see the metaverse or these communities in 5, maybe 10 years? What does success look like for them? And what does failure look like?
It's always cool to think about like existing stuff and how that's evolved. And let's take, telephone banking on your mobile phone, right? Like 15 years ago, clunky, novel, perhaps didn't work. Now super ubiquitous and everywhere. So I think the ubiquity of metaverse, especially when the interoperability layer is solved, because there's a bunch of holes there now, to Pete's point. And I think just a shift in the idea of what it means to be online and offline. I think it's just going to be integrated. I think they're kind of becoming old-fashioned terms, perhaps. So yeah, ubiquitous, I guess.
Following on from what Patrick was just saying about being able to jump between worlds, I think also the fact that I have a problem with my memory, and I had a really interesting point. Sorry, it's a medical thing. I'm sorry. Come back to me.
I think just to build on
I've
Patrick's
remembered.
point.
Quick, before she forgets.
They're like balloons. Occasionally they just like waft away, but sometimes I get them back. Yes, so we kind of touched on the word brands. We haven't really talked about brands, but more than just brands. I think it's going to be. It already is, but it's on this escalation scale of everyone being able to talk to their audience. Like, do you remember when Twitter first started and everyone's like, oh my goodness, me as a normal human can actually tweet at this famous person or whatever. And that's kind of normal now. But I think this is going to merge those lines again. And it's a really unique opportunity for everybody, not just brands, but anyone that wants to reach their audience in a unique way. It's going to be interesting to see the creativity and innovation that's going to come through this, because there are going to be different platforms as well that are hopefully going to be able to connect. And I think it's going to be quite a fun place to be. Not like what's that film where they target ads at Tom Cruise? Minority Report. Yeah, not that. But something much more fun than that.
I just wanted to vigorously agree with Patrick and Johnny as well about the whole being able to move between different applications. I think that's a massive part of what I think the metaverse will become. People shouldn't have to think about where they're going next. They shouldn't have to think about who they're going to bring with them. They should just be able to move between platforms, move between what they want to do right now, and be able to maintain that connection with the people that they were in the previous experience with. And I think at the point where people are able to do that, that's when, the metaverse becomes something truly meaningful. It's a little bit like when previously in the very early days of the World Wide Web, where you would be on AOL and then you'd have to kind of log out from there and log on to something else. And nowadays you just go to click on a different button in your browser and you're whisked off somewhere else. The person who's operating the mouse or the touchpad or whatever it is, or the screen, has no idea what's going on in the background. They haven't made a conscious decision to switch applications. They're just going from one place to another, and all the technology is taken away from them, and all they're thinking about is the experience. And it's really important, especially if we want to move away from just being a community of gamers who are in some way sort of tech savvy. We need to bring in all the people who aren't tech savvy, but who are used to just pressing on a blue word on a web page and going somewhere else. And it's that sort of paradigm that we need to get within the metaverse. I think
that's another definition of metaverse, which I really like, which is things going from 2D to 3D. So I'm kind of convinced, having spoken to a lot of the tech companies, that in 10 years' time, your kids, or maybe 15 years' time, your kids look at these things and go, what, you used to touch a piece of glass with your finger? Wasn't that really dirty? That's so old-fashioned. God, what you like cassette tapes now. And we will be using glasses that are incredibly powerful, running off the cloud, to do everything that you need on here for apps. And it's just in front of you, and it's instantaneous rather than looking down. And then if you just want to immerse yourself in an amazing world, you'll put on your VR glasses, which again will be incredibly light and comfortable, and you'll be in the most amazing spaces. For both of those, you're going to be rendering in 3D. So the web is all 2D on browsers. Everything's 2D. Everything's 2D ads. This is all about 3D. And I think you could think about the metaverse as a switch from 2D to 3D. If you go to a website which is flat, it's not how you naturally look at things. You look at things in 3D every day. And I think that may be where things are heading.
I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. Just before that, is there any last word you guys want to say before we go to the audience? Any
Dancing? No.
There will be a demonstration at the end.
Running around.
Oh, no.
Okay. Has anyone got a question? This gentleman here, straight up, please.
Yeah, I have like a million, but
Okay, just one.
I think the one that I feel is most pressing is you talked to yourself about one of the challenges for Home itself was that you required the devs to kind of buy in, and there was a little bit of like they had to adjust what they're doing a little bit for that quick, smooth transition. So how do you guys see people, like, did you learn anything from that that might help people get over that massive hurdle? Because when you're talking about the metaverse, you're talking about doing that, possibly even outside of the Sony world where you don't have any control over what they're doing. So how would you convince those companies to buy in to, structure their code in a way that you can create those kind of flowing transitions?
I think Sony funded some of the devs a little bit initially. So that's happened a bit in VR and in lots of other areas. In order to start a new space, a new metaverse, a new thing, you sometimes it helps to fund the devs and help them get used to it. So I think, we used to do a little bit of stuff for Sony with some, creating spaces for some of their IPs and their brands. And that money was a nice solid income that allowed us to then fund making our own stuff and trying it out and experimenting. And I think they did that with a few devs. And that's a really nice way of building a bit of an infrastructure. It's very scary to have something brand new and going, right, devs, go pay and fund everything yourself and go make it, and hopefully you'll make some money. So they were quite smart about it, actually.
I think another way of looking at that, this is going to sound more glib than I intend it to, but I think the thing is to try and avoid proprietary technology wherever possible, particularly if you're a relatively small company that can't, afford to bankroll other developers to create content for you. I think the simplest way to approach that is try and use what they're already familiar with and build on that. And then that way, the other thing that you can do as well is try and create samples, specific samples that are producing the effect and the capability that you're looking for. Because if you can provide those, however small they might be, however basic you think they are, people will look at those and they'll use those as a jumping point to build something way beyond what you imagined could be achievable. But I think the key thing is just to try and make it as familiar and as easy for them to jump onto.
Okay, we've got other question. This gentleman over here.
Do you see the issue of interoperability being more of a business problem as opposed to a technical problem? For instance, had PlayStation Home been so successful and still going, would you be able to sit down with your equivalents at Meta and agree to being interoperable with all the assets that Patrick was creating and things like that?
That's a good question.
You were sort of looking at me when you were saying that, so I'm guessing that. I mean, yeah, inevitably, I guess the more successful you are, the bigger say you get in things. I mean, you can look at Epic now, and they're a driving force. Epic clearly has an idea of what it sees as the metaverse. It's not what everybody's idea of the metaverse is, but they have a very clear idea, and they've got a serious amount of clout, and they're in a position to be able to convince people that their approach is the right approach. You might agree with that, you might not agree with that, but there's no doubting that, if you've got that sort of already got that kind of bank of credibility and almost ubiquity. I mean, lots of people use Unreal Engine. It's we're all carrying it around with us today. So I mean, that ubiquity is already there. So yes, if you've got that, then obviously you're going to use it. But a lot of people aren't in that position, and so if you're not, then you need to think of other ways of kind of working around that. And I think, proprietary technology as part of your platform is not the most important thing. Getting a community together, getting a community of developers together as well, those are the most important things. And then if you want to, you can expand and increase and improve that technology as you go along. But there's no point doing that if you haven't got a community.
I think the easiest thing to do is for companies to have a reciprocal approach where players can jump from one to the other with the players. Where it gets complicated is IP rights. If you've bought a Ghostbusters t-shirt in a particular world, can you use that in other spaces? That gets legally very difficult for people that own that stuff. So I think the starting point is let just players jump between them and make that easy, and then worry about the other stuff later on, maybe.
Yeah, just add another thought, just to double down on what Pete was saying. Obviously, Unity, Unreal, there are huge libraries of 3D models. There are common file formats for 3D art now. So there's a huge amount of common technologies that we can all sort of share. And then when you mix that with the promise of blockchain and like scalable authentication en masse, this is why people are excited, right? So there are already, I think, the start for solving that. But it's really interesting.
Okay, one more question. The lady there, I think, tried earlier. So,
did you make any considerations about like player behavior and moderation when you were going in? Did you have many like bad experiences with player behaviors, and like was Sony prepared for that at the time from a moderation standpoint? I'm just really curious, like how actually people were on the platform.
Well, I mean, first of all, yes, obviously, that's that was inevitable. We all knew it was going to happen. We were obviously, being Sony, we're incredibly fortunate to have an extremely good moderation team just there ready for us. Very, very experienced on other games. They were just there ready to go. We had there was entire communities of glitchers. They were that's what they did. They went in and they just tried to break as much collision as they could, and that was just what they did. That was the whole point of their existence in home. So I think it was just one of those. It's quite entertaining from my perspective to watch. It was kind of like a battle at one point. We were just trying so hard to try to kind of patch the collision and furiously trying to kind of make things perfect. But I think that was really against the whole idea. Eventually, we realized that there's this whole community. Thanks, I'm my biggest fan. So that's pretty much yes. The answer. Long story. The short answer is yes. I've been told we've got 1 minute left.
Can I just quickly add one tiny thing? We also put in place the ability for players to report. So we had a really good reporting system that kind of evolved over time. So if players were experiencing difficult things with other players, they could report them. And then we had obviously the moderation team to check through those reports and try and be as fair as possible. So there was a lot of putting things into the hands of the players. And I think that's a really important part of the community, that, you know, you are kind of responsible, as, you know, you're responsible for yourself, but also responsible for others as well, in a way.
Okay, well, I think that is the end of our time. Thank you very much for coming to this. Thank you very much to these wonderful panelists and everyone for bearing with the heat. So we give them all a round of applause. Okay, great.
In which case, do any of you
I'm sure we could facilitate something. Yeah, I mean, Pete's still at PlayStation, so